观众朋友们好，现在您看到的是今日华尔街频道的专访栏目，我是主持人 Lizzi 李基。本期专访嘉宾是彼得·达林。彼得·达林是瑞典籍著名的人权活动家，专注中国维权运动，是人权卫士紧急救援协会的创办人之一。2016年，他在北京以涉嫌危害国家安全罪被捕，而之后在接受《纽约时报》采访时证实，在被拘禁的23天中，他接受了审问、不准睡觉、不关灯等酷刑后，被命令写悔过书，并且进行电视认罪。彼得·达林的被捕与中国当局公布其认罪视频的行为受到了媒体的高度关注。他也是第一位因为支持中国人权运动而遭到逮捕的外籍人士，也是中国官方媒体公布所谓认罪言论的第一位外籍人士。他的经历似乎表明，在中国的 NGO 寒冬将至。在本期采访节目中，彼得·达林为我们回顾了有关于瑞士与中国国安部门的秘密协议到底是怎么回事，加拿大的2位迈克尔到底命运如何，以及如何用马格尼茨基法案对于中国人权侵犯官员提起制裁。
Yeah, so before we jump right into our interview, I just wanted to invite you to, introduce yourself a little bit, who you are, what you do. We're especially interested in the work of safeguard defenders. Can you also tell us more about what safeguard defenders do and what your current mission and projects are?
For sure. Thank you for asking. Safeguard Defenders started as an organization shortly after I was deported from China and could no longer continue my work with the NGO that I was running in China for many years. But we've carried on the same mission, which is focused on perhaps the most repressed civil societies across East Asia, especially China, but also places like Vietnam, and trying to support local activists, local lawyers, local media, and civil society groups to defend human rights and promote rule of law. In addition to that kind of support, direct support to people on the ground, we utilize our quite extensive network to identify new developments and trends that we see happening often long before the media or politicians or diplomats pay attention to these new developments. So we perform quite a lot of research and release small but cutting-edge type research reports on what's actually going on in, for example, China.
I see. So you mentioned you were deported from China. If you don't mind, can you tell us a little more about then? Why were you deported by the Chinese authorities?
Well, myself and a great number of my colleagues were partly related to what is now known as the 709 crackdown. A significant number of our partners across the country were part of the 709 lawyers. So for about a 6-month period after that crackdown began, the government, especially the Ministry of State Security, started moving in against our NGO. And I myself and several colleagues and even my girlfriend were kept in RSDL by the Ministry of State Security for about 1 month as they attempted to shut down the organization and our work. Luckily, unlike others, I was deported and did not have to spend 6 months or half a year inside these special facilities like many other victims.
I see. So we're going to come to the kind of detention that you just mentioned later. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about a new report put out by Safeguard Defenders. So I think it was a week ago, and the report was on a secret deal between the Swiss government and the Chinese police. Can you tell us a little more about what the deal is and how you discovered that secret agreement?
For sure. The deal, which has not been public, even for members of parliament, raised quite a lot of concern throughout this autumn in Switzerland. Little pieces of information has been leaking out of the existence of a special kind of deal between the Swiss government and specifically the Ministry of Public Security in China. Normally, these kind of deals called readmission agreements are fairly innocent and just establishes a way for different governments to communicate when they need to identify who people in their country is. For example, if they need to find out if a person in Switzerland is Swedish, they will simply communicate with the Swedish government. However, this agreement with China is an entirely different kind of agreement, And once we got our hands on it and analyzed this agreement and compared it with other similar agreements, it became clear why they've been keeping it a secret.
And what are some of the motivations behind this agreement that you can tell us more about?
Well, the agreement is very interesting in that it is apparently pursued on request of the Swiss side, but it gives entirely all the benefits entirely to the Chinese side. They allow agents selected by the Ministry of Public Security, China's police, which is also an intelligence organization, to visit Switzerland. While they're there, they're given Schengen visas, which allows them to travel freely across the EU, and their identities must be kept a secret by the Swiss authorities. This is supposedly to assist in verifying the identity of suspected Chinese nationals who can be sent back to China. The problem with the agreement is that they're inviting agents from a police organization to roam Switzerland freely during the duration of their stay. They're keeping their identities secret, and these missions are classified as unofficial, apparently on request by the Chinese side. The problem is more theoretical than practical. The Swiss government say that this agreement have not been used very much, but the fact that an agreement of this kind have been entered into shows an incredible level of ignorance from the Swiss government side. And it also poses a significant security risk to its European neighbors, because entry into Switzerland would allow these agents, whose identities are kept secret, to roam Europe and the Schengen area. So it's a significant potential security risk. And the fact that the government has tried so hard to keep this away from the public is very worrying.
I see. So it reminds me of something called foxhound, which is sort of the focus of attention in the United States by FBI and by the relative agent. You mentioned the reaction from the Swiss government, but do you expect this agreement to be renewed? What will be the future of this agreement as far as you can tell?
Well, during the autumn, the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Swiss Parliament have been informed about this agreement and the fact that it ended very recently on December 7, and that the government is hoping to renew it. But with more information being made public, there is growing resistance in the parliament from several of the political parties represented in the Foreign Affairs Committee, but also in public. And with this release of the document and the extensive media attention that this has received, not only in Europe, but across the world, is likely to make it more difficult for the Swiss government to pursue such a deal, an extension, a renewal. The Foreign Affairs Committee is demanding that they be consulted before any new deal is made, but they do not have the right to stop it. But there is, of course, an increased political cost to the government to pursue this kind of deal with more and more details leaking out. So I think it's at this point unlikely that they will be able or willing to renew it, but there is talk that they will make a decision about this in the spring of 2021.
I see. Interesting. So, in addition to extradition, which you discussed in great depth just now, there's another tool that's commonly deployed by the Chinese authorities, which you just mentioned, RSDL, so residential surveillance at a designated location. Sadly, we've heard lots of those cases just in the past few months. The latest victim might be成蕾, the anchor woman, actually from a state media, who is also an Australia citizen. And before that, we have the two Canadian Michaels, who are household names in international politics by now. And we have the Australian writer Yang Hangjun. And more recently, we have a reporter from Bloomberg, who is a Chinese national, but who is believed to be a friend of成蕾and who might be connected to the成蕾case as well. So as someone who works in the realm of human rights, can you tell us a little more about how the system of RSDL works and why is it concerning?
For sure. RSDL really started in the early days of 2013 and was initially a specialized tool used by either higher level police or, in the case of foreigners, the Ministry of State Security. is used against high-profile targets because it provides the government with significant power that the normal judicial system does not provide. Once in RSDL, where you will often spend 6 months or half a year, you're held incommunicado. You do not have the right to access lawyer or communicate with your family. You're kept in solitary confinement, completely sealed off, and the location of your detention must be outside of the normal judicial system. That means that they are not allowed to hold you in police stations or detention centers, for example. And of course, your location remains secret. And if you're a foreign government, if you're a foreign citizen, your location is kept secret from your government as well. So all of this taken together amounts to an enforced disappearance, and it gives the government significant power. It's a 6-month-long process for investigations where you basically disappear. These days, the system is used on a widespread basis. We released a report on the International Day of the Disappeared, August 30th this year, using government data from the Chinese judicial system that indicates that at least 30,000 victims have been disappeared into the RSDL system. And it also showed that the scope of the system is expanding annually, year by year. We are likely to reach 10,000 victims per year, either next year or the year after.
I see. So, speaking of human rights violations, I think, it's no secret that China's behavior is especially egregious on that front. But speaking of, or what the international community can do to tackle that problem, it gets a little harder than that. So I wanted to start with sanctions. So there's the Magnitsky Act, which has been, evoked in China and also in some European countries. Can you tell us a little more about that act, how it actually works, and what kind of people are likely to be targeted by the Magnitsky Act?
For sure. Actually, on December 10, which was the 2-year anniversary of the detention of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spivak, the 2 Canadians, we filed the head of the Ministry of State Security and the head of the Ministry of Public Security for Magnitsky sanctioning in Canada. And we are following up with similar recommendations for sanctions in the United States and in the UK, and when time is right, in the EU, when the new Magnitsky Act is passed here. What makes the Magnitsky Act so powerful, and we've seen this in particular in regards to Russia, is of course that it allows you to go after individuals. You do not go after entities or governments or nations, but rather the individuals. For many people, especially a little bit higher up, there tends to be significant financial advantage to carrying out gross human rights violations. And in many of these countries, especially in China actually, those officials are desperate to have that money sent outside of China. They buy property, they have bank accounts, they transfer it to relatives who may live outside of China. And what the Magnitsky Act allows is to go after these proceeds, the bank accounts, the houses, the condos that are being bought. So it's a way to really undercut the reason why people carry out these kind of human rights violations by ensuring that these proceeds, the money, will not reach these violators. And we're seeing that this really is an instrument whose time has come. Australia is very likely to pass its own Magnitsky Act quite soon. It's being discussed in Japan. And of course, the EU is now moving to adopt it on an EU level. And we've seen individual EU countries also move on this. I think the last one was actually Kosovo. So it is potentially a very powerful tool to go after these individuals that are either very corrupt or commit systematic and gross human rights violations. For example, the head of the Ministry of Public Security. Because a lot of these violations, such as torture or enforced disappearances, if they are done systematically or widespread, according to the Rome Statute, which is the basis for the International Criminal Court, these actually amount to a crime against humanity. So these are severe and significant violations, and the perpetrators can actually be punished, perhaps for the first time, with these targeted sanctions.
I see. So I just wanted to push back a little bit. At least, in the case of China, many officials might have assets overseas, but those assets are not directly under their names. They might be held by a business associate, they might be held through entities, they might be held in a foreign trust. So will that make it potentially harder to track down those assets and punish those individuals?
Yes and no. It will make it more difficult to identify where these proceeds are being kept, but especially in the United States legislation, you can also go after those that are related to the human rights violator. If it's obvious that their son or daughter or a business partner is holding these accounts on behalf of the violator, you can go after them as well. So when the Magnitsky Act is done right, as in the case of the United States and hopefully in the coming one in the EU, there is nowhere to hide, really.
I see. So we are talking about like their sons and daughters studying abroad. They might be holding properties in their names.
A good example, of course, is, I guess, a rather famous example now. There is a cello player from Russia who is a close friend of Putin. And this musician has never been particularly successful. But they found out that he held 200,000 US dollars, 200 million US dollars in offshore banking on behalf of Putin. So there are many ways to go after how these proceeds, how this money is funneled through family and friends and acquaintances and through various corporations in tax-free havens, etc. It makes it difficult, it makes it slower, but it is possible.
So finally, I wanted to discuss a sort of a more recent case with you. So we know what has been happening in Xinjiang has captured a lot of people's attention. But a recent decision by ICC International Crime Court seems to be a little surprising. So basically, the court refuses the designation of the atrocity in Xinjiang as genocide. So what was that decision about? Can you sort of walk us through some of the considerations and the international community's response to that?
Well, when it comes to the international community's response, I don't think one can really say much at this point because this is all very new. But the court went out of its way to make clear that they did not actually say that what is going on is not such a crime. What they said is that from the evidence provided from other countries that are bound by the International Criminal Court, they could not say so. China has not signed the Rome Statute, so they are not bound by it. Therefore, the ICC cannot investigate China. So what made this such an interesting proceeding was that they were using victims taken from other countries back into China as the basis of evidence, countries that have signed. But it was technically a very difficult case. And I'm not surprised that they had to calm down and say that, no, we do not have the right to pursue this. But what they didn't say, and this is very important, is they did not say that this does not amount to a crime against humanity. They simply said that this is outside of our jurisdiction. So there is still possibilities, and I'm pretty sure that the people behind this is going to continue pushing for an evaluation and try to find more foreign victims, for example, people from Kazakhstan, for example. So the door isn't entirely shut.
Thank you for the clarification. That was super helpful because I think a lot of people sort of misunderstood that part of the news. So finally, I wanted to sort of look ahead another 4 years under a new administration in the United States. So the Trump administration has sort of heated up the temperature between China and the US in multiple fronts. Now we have a new administration. What do you expect from the Biden administration in the next 4 years?
Well, I think initially a new Biden administration will not make any sudden changes. I think they've been very clear that the current policy will stay as it is for now while they evaluate and make plans. I think the one thing we will see is at least an attempt, hopefully a successful attempt, to work together with their partners and to coordinate these actions with Australia, with Japan, with the EU, with UK, and so forth, in a way that the Trump administration failed to do. Actually, one of the first major meetings after Trump became president was in Ottawa, Canada. And the French president actually told Trump directly that if you're going to, initiate what some people call a trade war with China, the only way forward really is to do it together with the EU, because only together are they strong enough. Of course, that did not happen, and Trump has been sort of fighting on all fronts at the same time, which has diminished the potential outcome and results. I don't think we're going to see such mistakes from the Biden administration. I guess there is some fear that a Biden administration might go back to a softer China policy, as we saw during the Obama administration, which I hope is wrong, but it's a little bit too early to say. I think staying on target with a pretty tough policy until we start seeing proper changes, but multilateralizing that by working with the partners in question that I just mentioned is the best way forward. China may be growing, they may be strong, but they are still relatively small in comparison to the United States, but in particular the United States and its group of allies such as the EU and Japan. So can they manage to coordinate their actions better? They are in a very strong position to get China to adopt to the changes that they need to adopt to. If nothing else, only to be able to even stay in the World Trade Organization. The recent behavior we've been seeing from China is becoming more and more unacceptable to more and more nations. The only thing that comes to mind is we did release a very comprehensive manual aimed at local activists, local groups, etc., and how you can actually work with the Magnitsky Act. It's a very comprehensive guide in Chinese written for regular people, so that this is not just something for experts to deal with, but a normal person, a church group, a local group somewhere can actually decide that they want to do something with the Magnitsky and actually have and work up a sanctions recommendation. So this guide, which is available in hardcover as well as online for free as a PDF, provides all of that information. It's a very significant work. Nothing like this has ever been done before. So I can send you a link to where you can find that guide. And if it is possible to show that, that would of course be very useful, because the more people that get access to this, the better, obviously.
Awesome. That would be super helpful, and we will make sure to include that in the show notes part of the small illness. Thank you so much.